Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's me, it's Clayton. And for these next few reviews, I'll be reviewing some anime that I've been watching on Crunchyroll over the winter 2017 anime season. Now I've watched 5 anime over this season, and the first one I'll go over is Masamune-kun's Revenge. Now, let me tell you the story of Masamune-kun's Revenge. The story is about Masamune Makabe, who 8 years before the events of the story was called Pig's Foot by a girl that he liked named Aki Aragaki. For the 8 years after he was called the insult, he trained himself in order to make himself into the hottest guy in school, and to eventually get revenge on Aki Aragaki, who coincidentally enough ends up going to the same high school as he does. So he works to try and get his revenge on Aki Aragaki while also learning about things that happened in the past, and also working with Aki's personal assistant, Yoshino Koiwai. But that's all I'll say about the story without spoiling anything. So here's the thing. When it comes to an anime that's based on a manga, you want to make sure first that the anime stays true to the original source material. You don't want to end up with a story like Tokyo Ghoul, where they disregard the manga's material and the story in general makes no sense because of it. Thankfully, I can say that from what I've read in the manga and from what I've seen in the anime, that the anime is a pretty good representation of how the manga story goes. They switch out a few things here or there, and they cut out a few chapters, but for the most part, the anime is very much like the manga. So that's definitely a plus. Another thing that I liked about the series was that the actors for both the English dub and the original Japanese voice acting casts do a good job with their characters. If you want me to tell you which one I prefer the original Japanese. They just put a bit more emotion and a bit more sincerity into their lines. The English dub is pretty good, especially with Josh Grell as Masamune Makabe and Morgan Garrett as Aki Aragaki, not to mention Monica Rial as Yoshino Koiwai, but I just liked a few more of the choices done in the Japanese version. Now, and one of the other things that I did like about the series was the fact that it has a story that kept me interested. The fact that this is a romantic comedy with a pretty original premise, with a guy wanting to get with a girl specifically to get his revenge on her for something that happened in the past. It's a bit exaggerated, but then again, considering that teenagers tend to exaggerate things, I should know, I was one, I personally didn't mind how melodramatic the majority of the show was. But let's get to the parts of the show that I didn't like, and unfortunately there are a lot of things that I didn't like. This is a very flawed show. First of all, most of the characters of the show are fairly unlikable. Masamune Makabe is fairly narcissistic throughout, and I get that he wants to be the hot guy in his school, and granted, we do get a lot of internal monologues from him which detail his emotional struggles, but despite the fact that they try to make him sympathetic, it's difficult to really care about him, considering just how narcissistic he is and how often he makes dumb mistakes that most normal people just would not make, especially since he seems to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. Aki Aragaki is very much a bully character. She's very cruel to almost all the men around her. She's very much a man-hater through and through, and even though she does have funny moments, she's not a very pleasant character to follow. And the same can surprisingly be said for a lot of the characters in the cast. Though to be fair, there are a few characters that I found interesting and likable, one of them being Koiwai Yoshino. Even though, yes, she can be snarky from time to time, considering she has to deal with Masamune Makabe and Aki Aragaki, I understand why she acts the way she does. And other characters like Tei Futaba and Kojiro Shuri are fairly likable, and in my opinion the most likable characters in the series. In Futaba's case, because she's a lovable fujoshi who always adds some funny moments and some levity. And Kojiro Shuri because even though he's an incredibly feminine boy, he's a very loyal best friend who always sticks with Makabe despite the fact that he can be very dismissive of him. Especially since Saori Hayami plays Kojiro in the Japanese version, it's even funnier considering he's so feminine that even a woman plays him in the original Japanese version, something that you don't get with the English dub. Another thing that I didn't like about this story was the fact that the story feels like it's all over the place sometimes. It feels like the story at times doesn't know what it wants to be. It doesn't know if it wants to be mean-spirited, lighthearted, or both, but ultimately the tone just sometimes does not work when it comes to the series. And if you think this is going to be a one and done 12-episode anime that ends up resolving itself near the end, turns out it is not. The ending to the anime is very much a sequel bait for a second season, which it might not get considering how it started off as one of the most popular shows of this anime season, but considering how the finale went, I very much doubt we're going to get a second season, especially considering how mad people already are at the ending. I am aware that the manga goes on after where the anime ends up going off, but I am honestly wondering if they have enough material to work with for a second season. I'm sure they do, but I don't know if it'll work. As for the animation, it's serviceable at best. The animation was done by Silver Link, who are known for the Baka and Test series. They're not the best animation studio in the world, but they can make some decently good-looking projects. This one is ultimately just okay. I mean, the character animation is limited throughout, but the designs do fit each of the characters, and some of the effects they use thankfully do look decent, and they don't use a heavy amount of CGI. So the animation's just okay for what it is, but since it's a romantic comedy, it doesn't exactly need to be great. I did find the series legitimately funny though, which is good considering it's a romantic comedy. Even though some of the humor can be pretty mean-spirited, there were some scenes that legitimately made me laugh, most of them involving Futaba and Shuri, but I found them fairly underutilized throughout the show. While the side characters do work well, Masamune and Aki are pretty flat as main characters. Like I said, they're not the worst characters I've seen in anime, but they're just not very interesting. Even though they try to make them interesting towards the finale of the series. So ultimately, you'll have to say, are you interested in this type of romantic comedy? If it's very much made for those types of people, for those types of fans, and if you're interested in romantic comedy in your anime, I guess you'll enjoy it. But if you're not, and if you hate the premise and you hate how cliched the first episode might be, then you won't like this series. Personally, I got enjoyment out of it, but I will say it's not really going to break any ground when it comes to romantic comedy anime. It's not exactly fun to watch, but it is interesting. And a lot of the enjoyment of the series comes from the plot twists that do happen in the show. Even though the story itself is unresolved still, I did enjoy learning a bit more about Masamune and Aki and several of the other characters throughout some of the subplots that are put into the series. There are subplots put in that do fill up time and, elongate the series into 12 episodes, but I found the characters introduced in the subplots, which I won't talk about for spoiler reasons, to be fairly interesting, and they do offer a new look into Masamune and Aki, respectively. But ultimately, is the series good? It's not exactly fun to watch, but it is interesting. I will admit it kept my interest throughout all 12 episodes, and if a season 2 does happen, I would watch it just to see how the story ends, if it plans to do that. So overall, I consider Masamune-kun's Revenge to be an in general okay series. If you don't mind the disappointing ending and the cliched first episode, I'm sure you'll have a good time. I'll give Masamune-kun's Revenge a 7 out of 10. See you next time.